really interesting fight at lightweight as we have Spain's El Fenomeno Joel Alvarez taking on Russia's, and Blackberry Smoke would like this. Waiting on the thunder. Russian Thunder, Alexander Yakovlev. And Matt, I'm excited about this fight because we don't have a lot of lightweights that are 6'3", and you have two of them right there now. Have I pulled out my measuring tape? Have I seen these guys in person? No. So only weigh-in day will tell us how tall who is who. But in this fight, I mean, Joel Alvarez, we've seen it out of him so far in his UFC tenure. 2-1. The first fight against Damir Ismagulov, former champ with M1 Global. We saw Yakovlev coming into the UFC. He'd fought for a couple different organizations, but mainly M1 Global. And for Alvarez, it was just way too much against Ismagulov. And to me, where have you been, Damir? It's been since last summer since we've seen him. I'd like to see a lot more of him. It was the pressure of Ismagulov and the wrestling that really get to Alvarez. Now, his next two times out, I mean, against Danilo Belluardo, great submission win there. Ground and pound in the second round. He was all over him. He was fishing for subs in the first. And in his last one, he was taking on Irish Joe Duffy in a fight where he was a plus 275 underdog on the broadcast. We told you to pick Alvarez. We did. That was one of those big Hail Mary underdogs. He got the win. Now, from Alvarez, what do we know? Really slippery jiu-jitsu. And we've seen it. Out of those 17 total wins, 15 of them by submission. Former AFL champ. And when he came into the UFC, it was a bit of a head scratcher. You got this guy with a really good record. Is it overly padded? And then he comes in and he has that Ismagulov loss. At this point in his career, you're still in your 20s. You've got an immaculate record. What's the ceiling for Joel Alvarez? I don't really know. Now, he's taking on Alexander Yakovlev, and you might say, hey, where have you been, Yakovlev? Well, I can't tell you that, but I can tell you that 170 pounds, Yakovlev took on two of the best fighters that the UFC has in Demian Maia and Kamaru Usman. Did he beat them? No. Did he get finished by them? No. He lost decisions against both of them. But he's a really tough out. He's got a win over Paul Daly on his career, which is pretty impressive. But lately, it's been a mixed bag. And I mean, if you want to look at his last 5 fights, we're going back almost 5 years ago when he took on George Sullivan. He beat him. Lost to Usman, lost to Zach Cummins by submission, beat Alex De Silva, and there was a long layoff between those two fights. The loss to Cummins and the win over De Silva. And De Silva was a pretty touted prospect coming out of Brazil. I know he hasn't looked great in the UFC. And then Yakovlev comes out about a year ago and loses to Roosevelt Roberts. That's a tough one. You've got Yakovlev, who has the Sambo background, and he's got a good wrestling pedigree as well coming out of Russia. You got the submission abilities out of Joel Alvarez that we've seen used in practice in the UFC. It's a tough fight to predict in two of the bigger guys at 155. I mean, they're in that recently released category like James Vick. Just so tall for this division.
And it should be a really interesting matchup. It's not often that you can say, I think Joel Alvarez might even win by guillotine. And not just because that's his best submission. The striking of Joel Alvarez doesn't get enough credit. We talk about the submission game. The submission game's how he beat Joe Duffy. But he stays really tall as a striker. And the reason he gets so many submissions is people try to take him down. It's not really to the effect of the Brian Ortega where it's, okay, your striking's pretty good, so let me shoot for takedowns. And you're just so good at jiu-jitsu. But for Alvarez, it's, if you do have that lazy takedown attempt, he is going to catch a neck or an arm or make sure that the scramble is always going to end in his favor. I do like his striking in this. For Yakovlev, it's just really hard to know what you're going to get because we've seen so many versions of him in the UFC, and I've never seen one version of Alexander Yakovlev, and I've gone, wow, he could be a top 15 guy. He's well-rounded in his skill set. There's not this one thing. It's not like, okay, his striking's not good, so just make sure he doesn't take you to the ground. He's at least serviceable at everything. A loss to Roosevelt Roberts, especially knowing what we know now about Roberts, it doesn't look all that great going into a fight against Joel Alvarez, a guy who can do a lot of the things Roberts can, who size-wise matches up with a guy like Roberts, is a tall, thinner guy for the division. So Joel Alvarez, I just don't really see how he loses this fight. And I wasn't even on his hype train. I didn't think he was... Well, I thought it was going to be Joe Duffy, but I did think Joe Duffy was going to be a harder fight for him. And for him to go out there and get that first round stoppage, I was really impressed, and it really made me buy into the hype.
Well, that's the thing, Matt. Like, if you want to talk about buying into the hype, now, we're a little early on these picks just due to circumstance, but the odds are insane. Joel Alvarez went from being a plus 275 underdog in his last fight to a minus 275 favorite in this one. Yakovlev plus 215 is the underdog. If you look over on Tapology, limited sample size, this fight was just announced. Out of 322 votes, 88% going Alvarez, 62% saying he's going to win by submission. You're buying too much into the hype, odds makers and fans. Do I think he's going to win?
Yeah.
Yes. And would that lend credence to the odds being where they're at? Well, maybe not. But with Alexander Yakovlev, I like what you said. I mean, he's serviceable at everything. He's a very well-rounded guy. At 36, is he going to make a run at lightweight that's going to knock your socks off? I don't really think so. I do like Joel Alvarez in this one simply due to the fact that if he gets taken down, he's slippery on the ground. His striking's not the best. I wouldn't expect him to go out there and get a spinning wheel kick knockout or go full Joaquin Buckley on us, but I do think that the not the sky's the limit, just a notch down from that. It's one of those shoot for the stars, and even if you miss, or shoot for the moon. Even if you'll miss, you'll land among the stars.
Other way around.
One of those corny cliches, but overall, I do see this one for Alvarez in this fight.
I agree. It is nothing against Yakovlev, but like you had said, at 37, it's hard to say, yeah, he's going to go on a run. He's like Alistair Overeem at this stage in his career. I think Alvarez, the upside's a lot higher for him, and I'm really excited to see where he goes from this fight. But yeah, I've got Joel Alvarez.
Matt, we're both going with Joel Alvarez to get the win in this one. You're not going to want to miss the rest of predictions for this card because there's a lot of under-the-radar fights, but you cannot miss the 2 fights at the top. Co-main event, Robert Whittaker, Jared Cannonier. Our main event of the evening with Khabib Nurmagomedov unifying the belts, maybe, against Justin Gaethje, unifying the belts. So you're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. As we always say, Matt, let's get into it.